Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
This is the second episode of the show, so welcome back. As a reminder, we plan on dropping at least one new episode a week. Thank you for downloading and listening, and let's get this kicked off with some notable news around the league.
All right, let's start with cuts. We have Adam Thielen from Minnesota been released after we thought he'd end his career there. He's going to be shopping around, and so far it looks like his only visit that we're aware of is with Carolina. Is that where you think he ends up, Jeff, or do you think he ends up somewhere else?
So, as we'll get to a little bit later, there is some passes to be caught in Carolina right now. We're gonna see him take a few visits here, and once he gets going, and I think there's mutual interest with Carolina for him to go back to Carolina and end up signing there because there's opportunity. It's nice weather. He's going to be able to play with a rookie quarterback. And I just feel like he's going to fit in best there. And there's a chance that he could be playing with Andy Dalton week one, which we'll get to a little bit later as well. What are your thoughts? Like, where do you feel like he fits in? And is it Carolina or is it another place?
There's certainly targets to be had at Carolina, so I agree there. It's the only visit that we're aware of as of this point, but there is speculation with his connection to former teammate Stephon Diggs that he could go to the Bills and be the Bills' long-awaited number 2 wide receiver to help that offense out. I think both of those spots would be phenomenal. I think either one of them could be the best spot for him. Outside of that, I'm sure there's plenty of wide receiver needy teams, but that's all I see for him right now.
Yeah, there's really not too much on the wide receiver market right now. And that is, it's becoming drier by the moment. This is not a good rookie draft for receivers. It could spur Odell Beckham Jr. into getting a larger deal than he probably would have otherwise. But that's only because when there's a lack of supply, the demand is way up, and he's going to get a much higher contract because of that. So speaking of higher contracts, last year, Washington stole J.D. McKissic away from Buffalo by matching the contract that he got during the legal negotiation period. And they've already cut him this offseason. So he was 1 year into a 3-year deal, and he was cut with a failed physical designation. What do you see next for him?
I think he's going to be sitting on the sidelines for a bit, but someone is eventually going to offer him a cheap contract to be on their team on a 1-year prove-it deal. I just don't know who that team is right now, and he may have to wait till after the draft and into training camp. Do you agree with that, or do you think someone is waiting to pounce right now?
So I think there's a couple of options for McKissic. I think that he's going to be waiting, and he's going to have to sign a veteran minimum deal at this point if he plays. The fact that he was cut with a failed physical designation could spell the end of his career. It was a pretty serious injury last year, and we'll have to see if he can come back from that or rehab that and try to make it another go in the league. So speaking of retirement, do you think retirement is next from Matt Ryan, who was just cut from the Colts?
I can't see anyone being interested in him the way he's fallen off the last couple seasons. I think he was playing contract chicken with the Colts to get them to cut him so he would get more money and not owe them money from straight up retiring. He's most likely going to feel out the market and see if anyone's interested in him. but I could easily see him retiring. I can't imagine a particular landing spot that would be great for him. Is there anywhere you think he could still play, or you think he's done?
So I don't think he can play as a starter anymore, but that does not mean he does not have value in the league. And what if Pittsburgh picked him up and he kind of mentored Kenny Pickett along the way? That's a really cool spot where I could see him being the backup to Pickett and mentoring him along the way and kind of coaching him up. Maybe even getting to a point where Matt Ryan turns into an offensive coordinator or a quarterbacks coach or whatever if he decides to go into the coaching side after retirement. But he's 38 before the season starts, and his best football, his good football, his mediocre football is probably all behind him on a consistent basis right now. And for that reason, I do believe that he does retire. But I could see him mentoring someone and collecting a paycheck in the interim as well. Is that something a rookie quarterback, or not a rookie, but a second year quarterback would want?
Well, I think he would be a good clipboard holder unless he wanted to transition to coaching. But I agree. I don't see him starting anywhere. I don't see him contributing even coming off the bench and a spot start anywhere. But he could be a good mentor. He could be a good quarterback coach. So those are good options. Pickett could kind of use some pointers, in my opinion, to get
Yeah.
his career going. But I agree with your assessment, basically. Another person who could potentially be on his way out of the league is Zeke Elliott, released from the Cowboys in favor of Pollard as the starter going forward. Was that a good move for the Cowboys? Do you think Zeke's got some run left in his legs?
So I think he has some run left in his legs. Do I think he can be the one now? I do not believe that he can be the one. It was puzzling to see Dallas cut him, especially after McCarthy a couple of weeks ago said they wanted to be more run heavy and more run focused. Obviously, this skyrockets Tony Pollard's value into next season because he's going to be the lead rusher. Maybe they add like a Leonard Fournette, something like that along the way. But I don't see a scenario where Pollard isn't the 1A of that backfield. Now, I could see Jerry Jones pulling something of drafting Bijan Robinson and pulling the tag on Pollard. I could see that happening in a heartbeat, and that's another way to save another $11 million off the cap right there. But that's only because Jerry Jones is Jerry Jones, and he makes a lot of decisions. And we know he loves his running backs because this is why Zeke is stuck around for so long. And he loves when they're going to be stars, and everyone believes that Bijan's going to be a star. But his best possible fit would be anywhere that had a running back opening that needed a power back, because that's pretty much what he is at this point. Now I know he can still catch the ball, and I know he can run wheel routes, and he's actually a really good pass catcher considering his size. But I see him being more of like the thunder to someone else's lightning, and some of the places that have that and kind of need additional backs would be like the Buffalo Bills. They are in desperation, and there were even reports that came out today that they're looking to add a power back. And I don't know if there's a better power back on the market right now than Elliott. Um, Maybe they could look at Harris from the Patriots, as he's a unrestricted free agent, but I do believe that Elliott's destinations are going to be very small, like as far as who's going to be looking for a running back like him. But he believed it was better to take the take being cut versus taking the pay cut that Dallas was offering, because I don't believe Dallas was just saying go find a new job. Do you believe that Dallas just said go find a new job, or do you think that they offered him a contract and he said no, I'm not going to take that much of a pay cut?
I think they offered him a pay cut and he declined. I also think Dallas is getting ridiculed for having, I think, 23 million invested in two running backs. So they had to cut the one that was least efficient. I think Zeke's legs are run down by this point. They've leaned on him too much in the past. I think he's still a couple years from being out of the league, so I think he can still contribute in a backup role. Uh, the Bills does make sense, especially if they start leaning more on Cook and have Zeke to mix in with them. I think that would actually be a decent spot. But let's not forget that Zeke's last play was as center. So I think his running back days are very short and very numbered at this point. So
what other position do you see him at?
I mean, they can try him at punter. They can try him at right guard. I mean, I don't know, but no, I think he's going to be in the league this year, maybe next year too. But I think it's going to be more in a backup or rotation role.
No, I totally agree with that. I don't see any more lead back, star back from him. He'll probably still be a flex play depending on the team that he goes to, but that's only because he can still gobble up touchdowns in the red zone. Do you think he's better or worse than Jamal Williams, who we'll get to a little bit later? But Jamal Williams, kind of same age. Do you believe that Zeke has more left in the tank than Jamal Williams, or do you think it's the other way around?
I think it's the other way around. Jamal Williams has always been in a rotation. He has less tread on his tires. He showed a lot more burst last year than Zeke did. So I think Jamal Williams has a little more in him. I wonder if you give Zeke some rest for several months, if he can recover some of that burst and maybe be more can contribute a little bit more than he did this last season with the Cowboys. I don't know. But I think it was time for a change for the Cowboys.
So we'll have him come back in 2024?
Or just, just a little bit later in the year. Let him rest in training camp a bit.
Okay. So switching focuses to a few of the transactions from around the league, so some free agent signings and some trades from around the league, as we know that free agent frenzy hit and all the trades were consummated from earlier in the offseason, because the official league year started yesterday, March 15th. So the first pickup of the offseason actually came before the free agent frenzy. And the reason why this could happen is because Robert Woods was cut by the Titans prior to the free agent frenzy deadline. So that actually gave him a benefit, being able to negotiate with teams ahead of time. And what that allowed him to do is find a 2-year deal with the Texans. Do you believe that Robert Woods will have a fantasy impact with the Texans?
Well, I think it is interesting that while he disappointed last year, he was coming off of an injury, and now he's 2 years removed from it. So the Texans maybe have pulled off a smart signing here, that they signed a decent number 2 wide receiver for $15 million for 2 years, so it's $7.5 per. If he has recovered, he can contribute and overperform that contract. So it's potentially a low risk, high reward move, and they could even potentially uh, turn and flip him and sell him for more than what the compensation pick would have been for the Titans. So I think it's kind of savvy. We'll see if he can, bounce back and put up some stats this year, especially if Cooks has moved on from.
So who do you think opens week one as the starting three wide receivers for the Texans?
Woods, Collins, and let's see. I'm trying to see if he's going to be back from health injury here.
You like Mechie?
Yeah, I like Mechie talent-wise. He seems like he's recovered. So those three is what I would guess.
Okay. But
maybe Noah Brown. Yeah.
If Cooks is on the team, who gets bumped off the field? Does Collins get bumped off the field if Cooks is still around?
So I would say Cooks, Woods, and Collins at first. Maybe Noah Brown if he's still on the roster. I don't know how soon Mechie's coming back. That's the only thing. If Mechie was healthy, he would be in the top three for sure.
Right. I think the Texans have big plans for him this year, and I think they're going to. I think he's got the playbook down because he's actually had the benefit of sitting and watching, and he might be able to hit the ground running, and that is not something that very many people get, is some time to sit back, reflect, watch, learn, and then apply everything that they've learned later, because they're usually applying on the fly, and he's not saying this was a good situation, but he might have some silver linings out of this situation because he didn't have to play with Davis Mills and the almost number one overall pick Texans last year. So it was very it's going to be very interesting to see where he fits in now, and I do believe Robert Woods is going to be the primary target very early on in that wide receiver core, but we will have to see if he can hold on to it the entire year, how he is additional year after the ACL. But Robert Woods is moving on to a new team. And speaking of moving on to a new team, David Montgomery is moving from the Bears to the Lions. So he's staying in the NFC North. So what is the impact to Swift? And do you see this as a 50-50 split?
So I think Swift's in the same role that he was last year, that he was relegated to because of Jamal Williams. I think it's going to be the exact same situation. I don't think it's going to be a 50-50. I think it's probably 55-45, maybe as much as 60-40 in favor of Montgomery. And I personally like both backs. I don't think that Detroit favors Swift at this point anymore, and this might be Swift's last year with Detroit. So that's kind of disappointing to me. I would like to see him thrive, but I really like David Montgomery, and I think David Montgomery fits this offense a little better, and I think he has more juice left in the tank than Jamal Williams even had. So I think it's a very good fit. I really like it. Jeff, I know that you're not the biggest Montgomery fan, so how do you feel about this?
I believe that Swift will be the lead back here, and sheerly because he's the better receiving back. So I could see what you just said, Montgomery leading the backfield in carries, yards, like rushing yards and touchdowns. but I do believe that Swift will more than make up for that with his receiving work and his receiving ability. And they are both very young still. So Swift just turned 24 in January, and Montgomery will turn 26 in June this year. And what that kind of looks like is they're still two very young backs. We do know that Montgomery signed a multi-year deal, and we know that Swift is entering the last year of his deal. So this could really be a changing of the guard, as you said, because the coach, Dan Campbell, he does like the more smash mouth football. Kind of saw a little bit of that with Jamal Williams last year. And we could see a point where Swift does get traded from this team because they decided they want to be a more smash mouth team. There's just so much talent with DeAndre Swift, though, and I don't know what they would get back for him. And I also don't know a team that's really like itching to get a running back that could potentially be expensive after this year, especially if it pans out well. Do you think Swift starts this year on the roster?
I think he starts the year on the roster, and I agree that he's going to hold that kind of role. But they could move on from him in the middle of the year for all we know. So that's going to be a situation to monitor in the camp and into the year.
Agreed. Agreed. What if Minnesota moves on from Delvin Cook and we have another Detroit to Minnesota trade?
Trading Swift over there after they re-signed Madison.
Yep. But they just did it with Hawkinson.
I know. They really
So-
got to stop helping out their
Opponents.
division rivals. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that'll be a really interesting to see how that backfield shakes out. Another backfield that'll be really interesting is Rashad Penny is signed with the Eagles, so he'll be leaving after 5 years with the Seahawks, because I do believe he played his 4-year contract and then he signed a 1-year deal after that. So he had 5 years with the Seahawks. And where do you see him going in fantasy drafts this year?
Oh, I think that's too early to know for sure at this moment. And he certainly had an up and down career with Seattle with a few injuries that he battled. But he seems to, on paper, be the perfect fit for the Eagles running back spot. I know that's tempered by Jalen Hurts' rushing ability and the fact that they insist on using Boston Scott quite a lot. So I would say probably between the 3rd and 5th rounds at this point. I just don't know where in that pecking order he goes yet. Maybe we'll get a clearer picture as we get closer to the fantasy draft time period.
Right, absolutely. So before he had signed, he was going at 118 RB 39. So we're going to see how, and this is just going off of expert ranks right now. So we're going to see if he shoots up boards. We're going to see if he takes like a big chunk of the Miles Sanders role. I do believe at the end of the day that he's, when healthy, a more talented back than Miles Sanders. So it'll be nice to watch how him and Hurts play side by side with each other. And we'll see how he goes in fantasy drafts, because I do think he's going to raise up quite a bit from where he was before he just signed.
And we're assuming that they don't draft a running back. For all we know, they could add another back to this mix.
Yeah, I just don't see them using another resource on a back, because I think that they wanted to have, because if you look at how their backfield is right now, they have Penny, Scott, Gainwell, and Sermon. And I think they can make any of those serviceable besides Jalen Hurts at this point. And why would you want to spend high money and resources on an additional asset when your rushing quarterback kind of opens up lanes for anybody and kind of takes some of the attention away from the running back? And if you're playing against one less defender because that one defender is guarding the quarterback, that's one less defender you need to break tackles, block. It's a game changer, really, because you're playing not 7 and 8 man boxes, you're playing 6 and 7 man boxes, and that's really easy for a 5 person offensive line and a tight end to block at that point.
Yeah.
So I do think Penny, if he can stay healthy, is going to have a better year than Miles Sanders last year.
That's a bold take, in my opinion.
It is.
So he's come up before, but Jamal Williams signed over at New Orleans. How do you feel about this move? Is it a compliment to Kamara? Is it replacing Kamara? Is it filling in for Kamara? Is it potentially all of the above? How do you feel about this?
So I think Kamara is a healthier Swift. So the way that this shakes out is Jamal Williams will take the Thunder role and Kamara will take the Lightning role, but we do believe that Kamara's suspension is inevitable this year. Now, there is a scenario where this trial gets delayed, gets pushed out past the 2023 season, and he doesn't see a suspension until 2024. But Jamal Williams adds some real protection to that and seeing if that happens. And the Saints are doing a bunch of good things on offense right now. They've signed Derek Carr, which is an upgrade at quarterback. They've signed Jamal Williams, which is an upgrade at running back over Mark Ingram. They've re-signed, restructured, whatever you want to call it, with Michael Thomas. He's back next year. A veteran, a nice target over the middle of the field for Carr. And then you have Olave playing outside, and then you had Shaheed playing outside. There's a lot of talent on the, and then you have Taysom Hill, which is a Swiss Army knife. I do believe Taysom Hill plays way less at running back this year because of Jamal Williams, and I do believe he plays a lot less Wildcat as well because of Derek Carr. So if anyone's kind of in like a role here that may not have a role going into this year, it might be Taysom Hill. What do you think about Taysom Hill and what could potentially be going on with him and his role? Because I do believe they have to roster him for contract reasons, but I think if they could cut him, I think they would right now.
I think this offense is going to be a little bit of a conundrum. They have Jamal Williams now, who I do agree is an upgrade over Mark Ingram. But they also have Alvin Kamara. We don't know if his suspension is going to take root this year or if it gets postponed again to next year. We don't know how effective he's going to be at this point because he seems to miss a lot of time, and he wasn't very effective last year when he was in. We don't know when Taysom Hill's randomly going to be put in and running. We don't know if they want to continue doing that after going after Derek Carr and acquiring Derek Carr. I don't know if you want to use Taysom Hill like that anymore. So I agree they're kind of trapped with him on the roster, and it makes it very uncertain what their rushing offense is going to be like and who's going to get the ball in the red zone. If we get news on a suspension, maybe that'll clear up fantasy purposes for these running backs. maybe they move on from Kamara. Maybe they find a way to ship Taysom Hill to Denver and reunite him with Sean Payton. I have no idea what to think about this offense right now. I think David Carr might be a decent option. I think it might be a real NFL good offense, not necessarily fantasy fruit worthy, but or fruitful, I should say. But I am just very, very confused by this offense, and I'm waiting to see if there's anything else that gets shaken up before I start to pick it apart.
Right, absolutely. And not to correct you, but this isn't David Carr. This is Derek Carr on the Saints.
Yes, sorry,
I
Derek
know you
Carr.
have a little bit of trauma from David Carr, but just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page. And I did see one of the one of the reporters had tagged or at least said David Carr instead of Derek Carr, and it caused a whole bunch of funny jokes and even David Carr responding to "I got a job now." So that was something that was very funny that happened. But to your point with Kamara, they don't really have an out until next year, and next year's even sketchy at that. So this year, to keep him on the roster, it's an $8 million cap hit. To get him off the roster, it's a $24 million cap hit. So they're not gonna raise.
Yeah.
They're not gonna spend an additional 16 not to have him on the roster. But next year his cap hits 18 million, and to cut him at 16 million. So like that's only a difference of like $2 million. So you might keep him that year too for 2 million. But we'll see. He's been kicking the can. He's got dead cap money in 26 and 27 when he isn't even on the roster. So yep, he's gonna have some dead cap along the way. Taysom Hill, again, his dead cap this year would be 23 million, and his cap hit's only 6 million. So he's pretty safe this year based on that. But I mean, the Saints have really finagled and messed with these contracts for years during the Drew Brees era, and it has really it's just really kind of coming to roost slowly but surely. But that's just two of the Saints contracts that have huge dead cap because they keep kicking the can down the road. But eventually that can stops because that can retires. That can's off the roster. And I don't even know how this doesn't eventually blow up in their face. Like I do see a year or two of cap hell, but we'll see if they get there, because we really haven't seen a team get to that point, which is really perplexing considering how many teams have kicked that can down the road and moved it forward, kept moving it forward. So I do see them both on the roster. I do see Hill's role dramatically decreasing this year, because I do see Kamara playing the lead back. I see Jamal Williams playing the goal line back, and I see Jawan Johnson playing tight end, because they just signed him to a pretty neat tight end deal. So I don't really even see a spot for Taysom Hill on the roster. And they're not going to take your $35 million quarterback off the field to put out a Swiss Army knife. So he just doesn't fit anymore. But he is the personal protector for the punter, so I guess there is that. And he's Mr. Special Teams. But I do believe Jamal Williams does contribute fantasy-wise over to New Orleans, but he does not do it at the same level that he did in Detroit last year, because those touchdowns won't be there.
Well, you don't know. The touchdowns might be there, but we don't know who's getting them, basically.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to the Vikings, who were able to re-sign Alexander Mattison. So do you think they're going to keep Cook and Madison together, or Do they move on from Cook? Do they trade for Swift, as you suggested earlier? Do they draft a new running back? What do you think is going to happen with this backfield?
Oh, the Swift thing was just me ragging on them for trading Hawkinson in division.
Yeah.
I don't actually believe that'll happen. But as we've seen, stranger things have happened because they basically gave Hawkinson away for a bag of footballs to Minnesota. And let's be honest, that was a very much needed piece for Cousins because Cousins works really well with that good star tight end. And getting that good star tight end has really helped him. So Madison going back to the Vikings, I believe it was roughly $4 million a year. And basically, that feels like backup money. And I do think that Cook and Madison work really well together. Madison fills in every time Cook's injured because he does injure his shoulder a lot. I think that Cook should enter this. If Cook's not going to get it corrected, I do believe that Cook should come out this year playing with the brace on it, so he doesn't have to start playing with the brace mid-season, and he doesn't have to worry about it popping out on him mid-game. I think he could save himself a lot of pain, and because I do think that Delvin Cook has a lot left in the tank, like a good 1 or 2 seasons left. So it's all about if the Vikings believe they're better off starting Madison and trading Cook for assets, or kind of running it back one more year. I know they don't have Thielen anymore, as we talked about, but I feel like Hawkinson takes that role a little bit. And he didn't have Hawkinson to start off last year. He got him as a trade deadline acquisition. So it might be a better offense, and you factor in KJ Osborne taking another step forward. It may be a better offense this year for Kirk Cousins than it was last year, even though he lost Thielen. And at that point, you might want to just keep Cook and Madison together and see if you can make a run at this. Because I think at worst, with their team, they're probably the 3rd or 4th seed going into this year. Although I will say that they could take a step back based on in wins because they won an absurd amount of 1-score games, and typically over time those will even out. Those will flatten out a little bit. Like you won't go 11-0 in 1-score games. Typically you would go 6-5 or 5-6. So if those wins fall off of Minnesota's totals, then you could see them you could see them competing with the other teams in the North as well. So what do you think about that? What do you think about their fantasy outlook? Do you think they're more of a split of 50-50 of Cook and Madison, or do you think it's more of a still Cook's backfield and Madison is going to be the backup for this?
So I think it's still Cook's backfield. And I think Madison's still the backup. I think they're going to have probably a 60-40 split, in my opinion, as long as both of them are healthy. And as far as the Thielen thing goes, I think that the reason why they traded for Hawkinson was planning ahead for Thielen and wanting a receiving tight end to catch balls and complement Jefferson, and wanting KJ Osborne to step forward as well on the other side of Jefferson. So I think their offense is going to be very similar. I think Osborne and Hawkinson have an uptick in catches and stats this coming season. I don't think they're really going to miss a beat. I think re-signing Madison indicates to me that they're probably not going to draft a running back very high or at all in the draft, and that they're probably going to focus on defense. So they don't have to be in those one score situations, and so they can counteract their luck from last season. That because they had a terrible defense last year, which is very uncharacteristic of them. So I think ultimately their fantasy is not going to be very impacted, and I think they're going to try to step forward as a NFL team and try to improve.
I will note though that his dead cap hit would only be 6.2, so they would actually save $8 million off the cap this year if they cut him, and they didn't do a post June 1st cut. So his contract is very they can get out of his contract really easily at this point, and at any point forward, and this is his age 28 season. So just something to be on the lookout for if they're looking at another running back on the market and they sign another running back. I'll at least have my ear listening.
Yeah, they might draft one in the middle rounds this draft, and they might keep him for this season and cut him next season.
Yeah, but
So,
they could always cut him after the draft too.
that's true.
If they found a younger, cheaper person that they thought could do the job as well, they might be like, "All right, $8 million, we're gonna save it, done."
Yep. You know who did not get a cheap contract? Alan Lazard was signed to the Jets along with Randall Cobb. It seems like a bid to appease Aaron Rodgers, even though he said he did not have a demand list or a wish list. So how do you think this affects the team and affects Wilson, Moore, Hall, and the tight ends?
So I'll start off with Alan Lazard because that one is finalized. The Randall Cobb one is rumored to be finalized right around the same time that they may be acquiring a quarterback from Green Bay. Maybe not. But Lazard is he's a good wide receiver. Like, I mean, there's no. I'm not gonna say he's great, but he's definitely good. He's serviceable. He's proven that he can be on the field and contribute, and he's also proven that he cannot be a one. So, but that doesn't make him a bad wide receiver just because he can't be a one. I do think he's very physical. I think he's definitely someone that is a good teammate to have. And I think whether or not Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets, I do think Alan Lazard's a good signing for them. But what has me kind of perplexed is you got Garrett Wilson, who's entering his second year. You have Elijah Moore entering his third year. You have Corey Davis, who's actually had a decent season last year. And now you got Alan Lazard. So that's 4 wide receivers. If they do add Randall Cobb, which is a distinct possibility, that would be 5 receivers, plus they got Mims on their roster. That's a lot of wide receivers to be entering at this point with, like, and not knowing how to get snaps to them. I do think that even though they've said that they're probably not going to trade Elijah Moore, there's been a lot of times where front offices say something and they do the opposite thing a few weeks later. And I could see Elijah Moore going back to get a quarterback or to trade for a quarterback because he could be, and I won't say for sure because he did take a step back in year 2, so we don't really know what Elijah Moore is yet, but if he could produce at anything like his first year levels, he could be an asset to a number of teams in a dried up wide receiver market. And what that would do is that would allow the Jets to start off with Wilson, Lazard, and Davis as their top 3 wide receivers to start off the season. And then they could sprinkle in Randall Cobb here and there when people need breaks. And I think that would really help keep up morale, because if it's 5 receivers trying to fight for these snaps, I could see Elijah Moore asking for a trade again. Mims will probably be traded this offseason because he is entering his walk year, and I don't really see a benefit to the Jets holding him hostage anymore, because that's really what they've done. But then you pair them up with Brees Hall, you pair them up with Conklin and Uzama and potentially Mercedes Lewis. I just I an average so a great quarterback completes about 25 balls a game. I just don't know if there's enough balls to go around to satisfy everyone in this offense to even make anyone fantasy relevant. And that even includes Garrett Wilson, who should be ecstatic about potentially getting a quarterback in his area. What do you think about the Jets and how they kind of maneuvered this?
So nothing's gone through yet, and the Jets could get frustrated with the process and potentially move on. I'm personally not thrilled about Lazard if I was the Jets. I think he's not a very athletic wide receiver. He's a more productive, less athletic version of Corey Davis, who they already have on their roster. So on one hand, he puts up stats, but he may only put up stats because Aaron Rodgers likes him and wants to throw to him. On the other hand, he gets no separation. He has no vertical. He only has body position and relies on the quarterback to throw to him accurately. So I'm personally not thrilled about it. They clearly signed him because he's close to Aaron and they're trying to make Aaron comfortable. Randall Cobb, I don't think contributes much fantasy-wise at all. I just think he's a savvy veteran that maybe helps mold in Elijah Moore if Elijah Moore sticks around. So that could be something. I think Corey Davis and Denzel Mims are probably the ones that are on the outs because, like I said, Lazard is basically a slight upgrade on Corey Davis production-wise. Mims has been held hostage and hasn't really done anything yet. Either one could be included in a deal back to the Packers or to a different team that needs wide receivers. So I can see that as well. Ultimately, having Rodgers as your quarterback is going to elevate everybody else, regardless, in my opinion.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Yeah. So before we hop into Rodgers, because I think that's where you were going with this. So Corey Davis can be cut for a 6.667. So basically a $600,000 dead cap hit. So they could save $11 million basically on the cap by cutting Corey Davis,
which
That's
is
an interesting
Lazard's
number.
contract right there with one-for-one replacement.
Younger too.
So before I jump into the Rodgers aspect, you had talked about 25 targets, 25 completions a game. I think it's going to go away from the tight end position. I don't see Rodgers passing to the tight ends. He's going to want to target Lazard. He's going to want to target, if he likes them in training camp, Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore, in my opinion. I know he doesn't typically go the young route, but Elijah Moore, I think it's going to be his third season. It's going to be Garrett Wilson's second. Garrett Wilson was a very highly valued first-round pick. So I think that could sway Rodgers' opinion. That's just where I see it right now. But we can go into the reportedly imminent trade from the Packers to the Jets. Rodgers has openly announced his interest in playing for the Jets. Packers have openly announced that they're preferring to move on from Aaron, if not necessarily going to have to move on. They're just saying that they'd like to, but they'd more than willing keep him just for leverage purposes and trade talks. Nothing has gone through. We have no concrete evidence on what compensation is. It's been all over the place from 2 first round picks to maybe a second and a third, or maybe very performance or like very different writers on what could possibly bump it up to a first. Nothing has been concrete. It's all speculation. So we have no idea, but we all suspect at some point Rodgers will be in a Jets uniform. There's a small chance the Jets get upset and maybe move on to a Lamar Jackson. Maybe. I don't know, but it's likely Aaron Rodgers at this point. So how do you feel about Rodgers going to the Jets? Do you think it's 100% set? Where are you on this whole process?
So to begin the off season, I was almost certain that he would come back to Green Bay. And to this point, I'm still certain that was his first choice, was to go back to Green Bay. And I do believe that all changed once things started leaking to the media. And once things started leaking to the media and those things that were leaking to the media where Green Bay didn't want Rodgers, wanted to move on from Rodgers. Not that they didn't want him around. I think they're just ready to move on from him. I think they're ready to give Jordan Love a shot. I think they need to see what they have in Jordan Love before they can give him his fifth-year option, which they won't have that opportunity now. But they need to see what they have in him before they lose him. And this is the only time that they can do that. And they realize that. And I do think this deal gets done because Green Bay's not going to keep Aaron on the roster. Aaron's not going to retire at this point and give up the money. Like, he would rather go to Green Bay and make it awkward for them. And I don't blame him. I would do the exact same thing. I mean, that's money that I'm owed. I'm going to show up to work. I had heard one podcast host suggest that he show up to OTAs and he go load up the squat rack with 500 pounds and watch the front office panic about him potentially getting injured while doing team workouts and watch how fast he gets traded.
That'd be kind of hilarious.
It's funny, but it's not funny at the same time, because if he does get injured with a season ender in OTAs, Packers are on the hook for his entire contract. Like, they don't even have any wiggle room at that point. So I do think something has to happen before OTA starts, because there is that. I don't know if Rodgers would show up for OTAs. I don't know if he would show up for the Jets for OTAs. And that's one of the reasons why I thought they would keep Corey Davis over Elijah Moore, is because I do know that he likes to play with veterans more. And that was one of my thoughts of how maybe it would be Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, and Alan Lazard. But the more that I look at the contracts and everything like that, I think it'll be Elijah Moore. But that's going to require Rodgers to show up to OTAs and get chemistry and build rapport and be a leader that he's kind of stepped back from the last few years. And I think some of the reason why he did step back the last few years is because he hasn't been consulted as the quarterback of the team on some of the pass catchers that he'd be throwing the ball to. Like, I do believe that a franchise should always ask their star quarterback, like, hey, who do you like throwing the ball to? Hey, like, who do you have chemistry with? Like, and trying to make him feel the best that he can be in that situation. But I do believe this deal eventually does get worked out. I think they're playing a little bit of a game of chicken right now. I don't think it has anything to do with Aaron Rodgers at this point. I think he's decided that he wants to go to the Jets. It's literally a game of chicken between the Jets and the Packers at this point. Like, the Jets are like, we're your only takers. We're offering this, take it or leave it. And the Packers are like, we'll kind of leave it right now, but we might get stuck with this whole contract, so we might come back and take it. So it's just a giant game of chicken right now of the Packers wanting a lot, the Jets wanting to pay a little, and I'm sure they'll meet somewhere in the middle. At least I'm hopeful they'll meet somewhere in the middle.
They probably will. I would estimate, though, one first round pick is involved at least, and escalators on a second pick that could pump up to either a second or another first, depending on a lot of factors. So, we don't know, though. We have no idea yet. We're just waiting for that news to drop so we can see some Lamar Jackson news and then see some rookie quarterback news and try to figure out where everyone's going. But we do know where another quarterback's going, and that's Jimmy Garoppolo moving from the 49ers to the Las Vegas Raiders to reunite with Josh McDaniels and kind of set up that Patriots West offense over there. So is this an upgrade, downgrade, or is this about the same for the Raiders from moving from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo? How do you feel about this?
So, do you know that Spider-Man gif of the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other?
Yeah.
That's it's basically how I feel about this one. They might have saved a little bit of money, but I don't I don't think they're the exact same style of quarterback, but I do think they're the same range of quarterback like in the league. Like I don't think that they're going to be the piece that pushes you up and over a up the mountain. And I do believe that Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo have both thrived under very unideal situations. So like when Derek Carr lost Ruggs and Gruden and AB and everything over the course of 2 years, he still battled to get the team to the playoffs. Jimmy G, same thing. Bench for Trey Lance, kind of battle. Like they both have that mentality of like they're going to keep pounding and they're going to keep pushing forward, and they so I do think they have a lot of the same traits. Now I think Derek Carr is probably has a little bit more arm talent than Jimmy Garoppolo does, but I do think Jimmy Garoppolo might be a little bit better with executing this offense. As you did say, Patriots West. I don't know if Jimmy was around long enough for the Patriots to really pick up that playbook, but he what did he start like 2 or 3 games with them before he got injured, and they had to have Brissett come in, and then he got traded right that off season.
Well, I think he was there when McDaniels was there, so he at
Yeah,
least
they were there.
knows McDaniels' offense.
So I do think this is a little bit of a downgrade on Devonte Adams. Like I don't think this is crazy. I don't think it's a crazy downgrade. I just don't think that he puts up the same numbers that he put up with Derek Carr last year with Jimmy Garoppolo, because Jimmy Garoppolo has never proven to be that quarterback that like pounds one receiver the ball over and over again, but he's also never played with a Devonte Adams. So just going off of gut feel and thought of this is I don't see Adams quite hitting the peak that he hit last year, but I do think he's still a wide receiver one. He might even still be a top 5 wide receiver as we get into wide receiver ranks, but I don't know if he can. I don't know if he can be the wide receiver one this year. Basically, is what I'm saying. And then obviously they have Renfro there as well, and I could see him using him, but I don't know if Jimmy can support more than one fantasy option at a time, I guess, is my concern. And I don't know if he's done that in San Fran really either, like for an extended period of time. What are your thoughts?
So I think Jimmy is a downgrade, in my opinion, on Derek Carr. It's not a significant downgrade, but it is a downgrade, in my opinion. I think he could maybe support 2 wide receivers, which makes it interesting that they went after and signed Jacoby Myers, who also Patriots connection, continuing that Patriots West offense. Jacoby Myers is going to be used more in 2 wide receiver sets than Renfro. Renfro was not used in 2 wide receiver sets that often. I think it was about 50%, maybe less last year. So Renfro is probably the odd man out in that 3-man setup. I think he's still going to stay there, but he's only going to be in 3 wide receiver sets or out there if one of the other two is injured. So that's going to be interesting, and they might move to more three wide receiver sets, honestly, because of that trade that we're going to discuss shortly after this. But I think Jimmy is a smart fit for McDaniels. He knows the system already. He might be able to mentor a young quarterback if they're able to acquire one in the draft. Jacoby Myers is a very savvy pick. I think before Thielen was released, I thought Jacoby Myers was the best free agent wide receiver. Assuming, OBJ is not his old self. If OBJ is his old self, then he's the best, but we don't know that. So how do you feel about Jacoby Myers' fit with Jimmy Garoppolo in this offense?
So he's going from New England with Mac Jones to Jimmy Garoppolo here, and I feel like, again, this is a little bit of a Spider-Man gift because I do think that Mac Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Derek Carr are all around the same, being able to support fantasy options and stuff like that. I don't see him taking a huge jump. I do see his value being very indifferent from New England. I see it being a lot more of the same. I don't see him taking a huge jump forward. But as you did say, I do see him taking that leap over Renfro. And what that looks like is once he takes that leap over Renfro, he will get a significant target bump. They also don't have Mac Hollins anymore either at this present moment. So that those targets, that those are up and open for right now. And so that'll be really interesting. And as you had alluded to a little bit earlier, speaking of targets that'll be opened, they also decided that they don't want to be really like a tight end heavy offense right now because I don't believe they have one on the roster right now. If they do, it's someone that I don't know. But what do you think about Myers? And then we can move right into to Darren Waller moving on.
So I'm not too knowledgeable about Myers himself. I just know that he was the number one wide receiving option for the Patriots last year in a very uninspiring, disappointing offense that had no real offensive coordinator. Saw a regression from Mac Jones, which is disappointing because I thought he had a very good rookie year. So Myers, in my opinion, is probably going to have same or maybe slightly improved stats just purely because the Raiders have a better offensive setup with McDaniels than the Patriots had last year. So even as the second wide receiving option in the Raiders, he's probably going to have better stats, or at least at a very floor the same. So I would keep his last year as his floor stats going into this year. I don't think that they can support three wide receivers, but I think Devontae Adams and I think Myers will be pretty decent that way. And especially with Waller moving on, it's very interesting that they get rid of their tight end like that. That Waller's wife joked that because McDaniels wasn't invited to their wedding, so he got traded. So I thought that was kind of funny, but ultimately they're going to move to a more spread system, I would believe. So I think that's interesting. And we can talk about now Waller going to the Giants where they desperately needed any kind of receiving help that they could get. How do you feel about Waller's fit there?
So I believe that Waller is a great fit for Daniel Jones. I think this is the best receiving option Daniel Jones has gotten a chance to play with. And I do believe that he will lead the way in targets and receptions for the Giants last year, assuming health. And I do believe that the Giants are not done adding pass catchers. I know they have brought back Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton as well. So I know that Waller will be able to slide into the kind of the number one receiving role, even though he's not a wide receiver, and he's going to be competing for targets with Wan'Dale Robinson, uh, Isaiah Hodgins, Slayton, Shepard, but they still need to add one more piece there because I do think Wandel's going to be a good to great wide receiver. He may not be elite, but he's going to be a good to great wide receiver. They just need to they they almost need that big wide receiver on the outside. And I feel like that's the one thing that they might be missing, and I don't know where they get it right now, but Waller was a good step because now they have that big receiving option in the middle of the field. What do you feel about Waller? And do you feel that Shepard and Slayton coming back, do you think either of them pose a threat going forward?
So I agree with you. Waller comes in immediately as the number one receiving option. It looks like on paper he's the most talented one, I would think. And Daniel Jones is the type of quarterback that would look for an outlet for one of his bigger targets for a tight end. That makes sense to me. It's also smart to bring back Slayton as well as Shepard, who are familiar with the system, familiar with Daniel Jones, didn't have that big of a market out there. So it makes sense to bring those guys back, as well as re-sign Hodgins. Wan'Dale Robinson, I'm not so sure about him that he's going to be a good or great wide receiver. That remains to be seen. He's very talented. So he can still make a career for himself at this point. I do agree that they might be targeting another receiving option. I don't think that's going to be in free agency at this point. I think free agency is pretty dried up. I don't see an Odell Beckham reunion. I don't see them going after Thielen. They pick 25th in the draft. I could see them taking a wide receiver at 25 or even trading up for a Quentin Johnston type player. So that I could see that happening easily. Is that something that you think that they could do? Do you think they'd be interested in a wide receiver?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did fail to mention earlier that they did sign Paris Campbell as well, who hasn't done that much with Indy yet. A little bit larger of a wide receiver, 6 foot, and we'll see if he can potentially rebound. I almost feel a little bit bad for Paris Campbell considering the quarterback talent that he's the. So not that he's played with bad quarterbacks, because Philip Rivers, pretty good quarterback. Matt Ryan, pretty good quarterback. Carson Wentz had almost an MVP type season, one season. So it's not like they were terrible, terrible quarterbacks. It's just that he never got a consistency to play with a quarterback more than 1 year. He never really got comfortable with a quarterback before they moved on to a new team.
Or he never played with a quarterback in their prime either.
That too. That too.
So they're trying a whole bunch of dart throws. So I could easily see them taking a wide receiver in the draft. That's my personal opinion at this point.
Yeah, that would probably leave Shepard odd man out then, if I had to assume.
Well, it's whoever doesn't stay healthy in camp is probably who's gone.
Exactly. And speaking of health, the Miami Dolphins picked up the 5th-year option on Tua Tagovailoa's contract. So he does seem to be the quarterback for 2023 and 2024, and they do have Mike White as the backup for those 2 years. So first, I want to know your thoughts about picking up the 5th-year option. So they're basically saying, we're going to keep you for 2 more years. And then also the fact that they added Mike White to the quarterback room as a backup, and how you feel that he could. Do you feel like he's any threat towards Tua's job?
I don't feel Mike White's a threat. I do feel like he showed some spotty starts and some spotty starts for the Jets that he seemed like he could be a capable backup. He seemed like he might be able to develop into a low end starter somewhere in the league. But I think he provides young insurance on Tua's health. If Tua's not able to go right away, or if he stays out for this season, Mike White, and I think they might still have ties to Teddy Bridgewater yet. I know Teddy's a free agent, but he might come back too. So Mike White might help them get through this season if anything happens with Tua. But ultimately, they've shown that Tua is going to be the guy. They've announced Tua is going to be the guy. Everything that the team has publicly said has been in support of Tua only. So I know there's been some speculations they might have targeted Tom Brady, but it seems like they're all in on Tua at least through the 5 years of his rookie deal at this point.
Absolutely. And another player that they seem to be in on is Jalen Ramsey, who was traded from the Rams to the Dolphins. This is a pretty big defensive player trade in a stacked NFC or AFC East, and they also brought back Moser and Wilson. But how do you feel about Ramsey joining? Those could be some pretty interesting practices against Tyreek Hill. And then also, how do you feel about the backfield and who could lead the backfield between Mostert and Wilson?
So Jalen Ramsey, he's certainly not what he was, but he's still a good defender. He still improves and fills a hole in this defense. They've improved every skill position over the last couple years. They're in the running to potentially win that division against the Bills and the Patriots and the Jets. So it's going to be a very tough division. I think they're making a lot of smart moves, and I really like what they're doing off season wise. So how do you feel about those pickups? And as far as the running backs, I don't think it really matters. I think those are going to be a split 50-50, or I think they're going to take turns being the lead back.
So I'll start with the running backs really quickly, and I think that they paid Moser a little bit more. And I do think when they played with each other last year, Mostert started majority of those games, and I do anticipate that to continue. So probably Mostert has like a little tick over Wilson for me, but if we're being honest, I don't see either one of them completing 17 games. Neither one of them probably complete 14 games. And I know we'll argue about this on a future podcast. It's not because they're injury prone. It's just because they've never proven that they can get through a full season. So I think that they aren't as tough and as durable as some other backs in the league. So back to Jalen Ramsey. That was a huge trade by the Dolphins because they basically guaranteed 2 years of his contract as well. So basically what that means is now Ramsey's going to be practicing against Tyreek every day. That's pretty insane. And I do believe that Ramsey playing against Stephon Diggs, playing against Garrett Wilson, like it just made the AFC East that much more difficult and that much more harder as far as that goes. And I for one am excited to see what happens in the AFC East this year.
So talking about corner trades, we also had Stephon Gilmore traded from the Colts to Dallas for a 5th round pick. So McCarthy wanting to rest the defense more and rely on the defense more so than a passing game, they've come out and they've made a pretty decent trade, a 5th-round pick, even for a 32-year-old Stephon Gilmore, who can still contribute next to Diggs on that defense, is a pretty incredible get. So I think between Miami and Dallas, they're making moves to be some of the top defenses in the league. How do you feel about that Dallas trade?
I think that they're going to pair him beside Diggs, and I feel like that's going to be a good combo. That defense has already been one of the best in the NFC. The NFC is kind of weak, so it's a great move for Dallas. I'm kind of trying to figure out what the Colts are doing at this exact moment, but I'll figure it out.
They might be
point.
tanking for Caleb Williams.
They could be. It's very possible. So teams that tank typically get that first overall pick, which very few teams have actually tanked, as we know, and successfully actually tanked. But Carolina did not have to tank to acquire the number 1 overall pick. They did acquire it this past week, the number 1 overall pick for 2 first rounds, which includes the 2023 9th overall pick, and 2 second-round picks, which includes the later of their second-round pick this year, and then a 2025 second-round pick. And then DJ Moore is also going over to the Chicago Bears in this trade. Now, I think this is a trade that can potentially help out both teams. Chicago gets that much-needed wide receiver and a few more picks to stock up around Fields. And Carolina, who actually does seem like they're a pretty well-built defense, at least. Their offensive line's pretty well-built. It does seem that they're really making an all-in move to get that quarterback figured out once and for all. And I do think this is a trade, depending on where Carolina goes in the draft and how well that works out. But this could be a trade that works out for both teams in the long run. What are your thoughts on this? Like, what are DJ Moore's outlook in Chicago first?
So DJ Moore's outlook in Chicago, he's clearly going to be the number 1 option there, in my opinion, immediately. So I don't think that Fields is going to have any excuses when it comes to performance this year, because they're on their way to improving their offensive line, and they could potentially add an additional weapon as well. When it comes to the Panthers acquiring the first-round pick, this seems to be cheaper than what a lot of people were speculating it would take to get to the first overall pick. And I know that it's 2 first-round picks, and one of them is the 9th. But that second first-round pick, I believe, is 2025. So it's not even next year's first-round pick. So that, to me, is pretty savvy on the Panthers' part, because it seems like they know that they might not be very good this season. So they'll still have a relatively high pick in 2024 that they can use on themselves. And potentially they'll be good enough in 2025 where that's a lower first-round pick. So ultimately, this doesn't seem to have come out to be that much. They get their choice of whatever quarterback they want. There's even a chance that they can now move back to the 2nd or to the 4th spot and still get a top quarterback, maybe even the same person they were targeting, and pick back up a lot of the assets that they just lost. So I think this makes Carolina look very smart. I know people are rushing to praise the Bears general manager, but I honestly think Carolina got the better end of this.
Absolutely. I do think that they kind of traded a premium position to get this done as well, which we both agree that wide receiver is a very premium position at this point in the NFL. And basically, it's almost like trading another first round pick at this point because of what the what a wide receiver would go for on the trade market now. So it is it has been finalized as of today or as of yesterday. So this was a big trade, and I don't know if you saw DJ Moore's reaction on Twitter, but he did post the icon on there, and the draft pick that they are getting back for a first round is a 2024 first round pick as well, and then that second round pick is a 2025 second round
Gotcha.
pick. So that 2024 first round pick could be high, but I do believe they have a defense to keep that no more than where they are right now. So they could essentially end up with another ninth pick or around that area. So speaking of Carolina, they had kind of unloaded everything, and they didn't really have any quarterbacks on the roster because they also non-tendered PJ Walker, but they've since brought in a plethora of offensive talent. They brought in Andy Dalton, they brought in Miles Sanders, and they brought in Hayden Hurst. They brought in Andy Dalton on a 2-year deal. It'll be interesting to see if he starts week 1. They brought Miles Sanders in on a 4-year deal, $25 million, which is actually really big money for a running back. And then they brought Hayden Hurst in, I think, in a 3-year, like almost $8 million a year tight end deal. But a solid pass catcher, and that's kind of what they need right now. Do you think that Andy Dalton starts week 1?
I don't think that. But the interesting thing about Andy Dalton to me is most teams try to have a backup that's similar to what their starter would be. So if we kind of try to dissect that a little bit, Andy Dalton's not a scrambling quarterback. He's more of a pocket guy. So he could be more in line with a Young or a CJ Stroud type quarterback who we have all the links to CJ Stroud to the Panthers with Josh McCown and Reich's offense, and we have the Young link to the owner because the owner seems to really like Young, and I know Young is considered to be the top quarterback prospect as well this year. So it definitely seems like it's going to be one of those two based on Andy Dalton being there and not like an Anthony Richardson. I don't think Levis would go number 1 overall. So that's interesting. Miles Sanders is more high profile than the running backs that they've had since they traded Christian McCaffrey away. So it's very telling that they gave him a 4-year, $25 million contract. Like you said, that is relatively big money, especially this offseason. That seems to be one of the highest contracts for running backs, if not the highest contract for a running back this offseason. So he seems to be the clear lead back. I think they're still going to do a little bit of a committee, but I could see him getting more usage than he did at Philadelphia. I really like the Hayden Hurst signing. I think Hayden Hurst is a really good tight end, and they haven't had a good receiving tight end since Greg Olsen. So, especially trading away DJ Moore, they need a receiving option. Maybe Terrence Marshall and Laviska Shenault, maybe they take a step forward as well. But likely I could see the Panthers potentially going after a wide receiver. Like, I know they have Thielen coming in, so he could be brought in as a veteran presence, or they could be targeting a wide receiver in this draft or the next draft at some point too.
Completely agree, and they are still speaking to, as you mentioned, Thielen and Shark. So there's options still out there that they could sign, and they also do own the what is it, the 30, is it the 39th pick in the draft? But so they could always go a pass catcher there because their offensive line is pretty well set. Their defense is pretty well set. And it really is just focusing on getting a quarterback and getting weapons in for that quarterback at this point, which it'll be really funny to see Carolina do all this, New Orleans go pay all that money for Carr, and then have Carolina somehow end up better off because they didn't get Derek Carr, which could easily happen. It's a scenario that could easily happen at this point.
Especially if they make the right pick at quarterback first overall.
Yup. Yep. So speaking of the Bears, they
And the
have
Panthers.
yes. They've so obviously they acquired DJ Moore, and we do believe that his fantasy stock might take. Do you believe his fantasy stock stays the same?
DJ Moore?
Yeah,
I think DJ Moore's probably improves.
improves. Okay. So that I mean that'll be really interesting to see if he takes a Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, Hurts and AJ Brown. See if he takes that step forward with that star wide receiver. But speaking of the Bears and the Panthers, Deontay Foreman signed a 1-year deal with the Bears for pretty low money. I think it was $3 million, which is pretty surprising considering the year that he had with the Panthers. And then also right after that, the Bears signed Robert Tonyan. So what do you think? Do you think that Foreman could potentially start for the Bears, or do you think this is Khalil Herbert's job right now? And then secondly, do you think Robert Tonyan pushes Cole Kmet for snaps, or do you think this is Cole Kmet's job to kind of own and have right now?
So I think in both cases, the incumbent on the roster, it's still their starting job. So Khalil Herbert, it's his starting job. I think Deontay Foreman is insurance. So I know Khalil got hurt last year. So Foreman is just there waiting in the wings to take over and will probably rotate out with them a little bit. But it's Khalil Herbert's job, in my opinion. Kmet has all the talent in the world to be a really good tight end. I haven't seen it yet. So I think the Bears are hedging their bets a little bit with Robert Tonyan being there, a savvy veteran. I also think it's a very cheap way to bring in blocking help is to bring in another tight end to the system. So I think they're using that as well to offset potentially a rookie offensive lineman or another free agent offensive lineman that they're trying to bring in. So I think that's what that is, but it's very good depth moves, very high quality depth moves in my opinion.
Agreed completely on that. But quietly last year, Cole Kmet finished tight end 7.
That was very quiet, near
Yes.
whisper.
Yes, but he's getting really close to that breakout, and I kind of want to see him continue to take steps forward because I have been a big fan of his since joining the NFL, and I do believe he can take another step forward this year. So, speaking of taking steps forward, Juju Smith-Schuster did 2 consecutive years on 1-year deals, one with the Steelers and one with the Chiefs. And he kind of got a step forward this year when he got a 3-year deal with the Patriots. Do you think that he's the one in New England, or do you think it's someone else? And do you think this is a good signing for the Patriots?
So I'm not sure if it actually worked out in his favor because I think he was hoping to get 20 million per year, but he just hasn't put up the production to be worth top level market money. Jacoby Myers is gone. Jacoby Myers was the de facto number 1 last year, which doesn't say much because he only had about 800 yards receiving. So Juju is probably the number one at this point, assuming the Patriots don't draft a wide receiver, which they usually do not draft a wide receiver in the first round. And the last time they didn't work out for them. So he probably is the number one. Hopefully, an improved offense because they at least have someone who was an offensive coordinator before in Bill O'Brien. So I would think he'd outperform what Jacoby Myers did last year. But I've never been a Juju Smith-Schuster fan. I don't think he's that great of a wide receiver, and I know $11 million per year is a lot for us regular folks, but that's really, to me, maybe wide receiver 2 money. But the Patriots are a little bit cheap in that regard. So I probably will stay away from him unless his ADP is low enough to take a chance. So maybe as a wide receiver 3 or 4, the flex kind of in fantasy, maybe I'd be willing to go after him there. But it was not what we hoped for Juju after spending time with the Chiefs. We kind of thought he would put up big numbers and potentially go to a better spot.
I completely agree with that. And don't forget, they still have Devontae Parker, who always interests me, and I feel like he could be a good fit for Mac Jones, depending on health. Always depending on health, right? And then they have Kendrick Bourne, and they also have a Thornton that they drafted last year. So their wide receiver depth's kind of hurting, but it'll probably be Parker and Juju starting the season off as the top 2 wide receiver options, and they'll both be on the field most of the time. All right, so not only did the Patriots sign Juju, but they also signed James Robinson, who actually just left the Jets last week because they non-tendered him as a restricted free agent. And where does he fit in behind Stevenson? Is he the Harris role, or do you see it more or less when the Harris role was?
I think he's the Harris role. The thing with James Robinson, though, is he always seems to take carries away from the stud running back that everybody wants to get the stats. But I don't know if he has the juice that he used to have. But again, this is the Patriots offense. They always mess with us when it comes to running backs. So I don't know.
That Achilles injury is a career ender for a lot of running backs. So Foreman is one that has really worked really hard to battle back from that. But there really isn't too many success stories from that injury. So speaking of New England, they did trade Jonnu Smith from the Patriots to Atlanta. Do you think that he can rejuvenate his career in Atlanta, or do you think that it is too late for him?
Jonnu Smith has been one of the tight ends that I really thought that he showed promising years with Tennessee, and that Bill Belichick talked him up well before he actually acquired him and paid him a lot of money. I thought he was going to end up being a really good option in New England, and it didn't work out at all. But he's now been traded to Atlanta to Arthur Smith's team, and Arthur Smith was his former coach. He had his best seasons under him, so I hope that he can rejuvenate his career. I think he's there to balance out that offense and maybe go into 2 tight end sets a little bit more with that team. So that means that Pitts and London probably are going to be the top 2 wide receiver threats going forward. I don't anticipate them going wide receiver early in the draft. I think Jonnu is going to take over the primary tight end roles. So it's a good flyer move for Atlanta. he could have a bounce back year. I'm just going to keep my hopes down after his disappointment in New England.
Right. I mean, it would have to come out of the two tight end set because obviously there's still Kyle Pitts there, and they obviously bringing back Drake London, and I don't really even know how much there is to go around because they're probably going to be starting off Desmond Ridder week 1, and I just don't know how much juice that they have there. But speaking of the quarterbacks and the Falcons, they also brought in Tyler Heineke, who started a bunch of games for the Commanders last year. Do you think that Heineke pushes Ridder? Do you think Ridder has a short leash? What do you think? What's your gut tell you on this?
My gut tells me that they're rolling with Ridder for the entire year. I don't think that I don't think that they're anticipating making the playoffs. At least that wouldn't be a reasonable expectation, in my opinion. So I think they want to give the full year to see what they have in Ridder. And then potentially, if he's not the guy, then they're going to seek to draft someone. There's also the outside chance that after this draft, they could go after someone like Lamar Jackson if he hasn't been picked up yet. So that would be pretty sneaky as well. I think we can both agree that Taylor Heineke is probably just a backup at this point. He's a good backup to have, but I don't anticipate him starting many games in Atlanta.
Right. It's kind of interesting that you brought up Lamar there because they did acquire a second tight end. In a weird way, it feels like it's almost like a Lamar offense already, or it could be relatively quickly if they decided to go that route in a relatively weak NFC South. Like, how often is the NFC South going to have Derek Carr with a defensive coach, Tom Brady retiring, and Carolina having the number 1 rookie pick? Like, it just seems ripe for the picking, and Lamar would be a huge splash to like make a big move at that.
That would make the NFC South go from one of the worst divisions to one of the best divisions in a flash.
It would for sure. Speaking of the NFC South, former Cleveland Brown number 1 overall pick, former Carolina Panther, former LA Rams, entering his 6th season here, is going to be going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Do you believe it's him or Kyle Trask that starts week 1? Do you have high hopes for Kyle Trask, or do you think that's just coach speak that they're talking him up right now?
Well, I thought with Baker Mayfield, you're going to keep going and you're going to say former Oklahoma Sooner, former Texas Tech Red Raider.
He's had
Thought
a
you
lot
were
of
just going to bring it
formers.
all the way back.
He's had a lot of formers.
A lot of formers. He's a 6 foot even gunslinging quarterback who is going to have a lot of balls batted down. As you saw as a Panthers fan, you saw him get a lot of balls batted down. He's a good journeyman to good backup type player in my mind, which is sad because he was former number 1 overall pick.
Heisman winner, right?
I think so. He started over Kyler Murray in college too, so that's also interesting.
That is.
He's just another journeyman to me, and I think this is kind of a sign that they don't know what they have in Kyle Trask. We haven't seen anything from him. We don't know if he's any good at all. It's kind of a Jordan Love situation, but we've seen a lot more of Jordan Love than I have of Kyle Trask. So I think they're kind of nervous and they're not quite ready to tear it down yet because they still have a pretty decent team. But it's not a very encouraging sign to me. It just means they're going to be another middling team. So They don't have hope to rebuild right now, and they don't have a hope to make and win anything in the playoffs, in my opinion. So I don't know if this moves the needle. I think it kind of keeps them at a 8-9 or 9-8 max team.
So I think that Baker is going to be the one starting the games this year.
Probably.
I think they know what they have in Kyle Trask. I think there's a reason why they had Blaine Gabbert still on the roster last year to back up Tom Brady and not letting Kyle Trask do that. I think that speaks volumes that we haven't seen to Kyle Trask at all, and you don't even know what he looks like at all, like as far as gameplay. So I think they don't have anything with him. So I think they're going to move full steam ahead with Baker, and hopefully they get that Baker with the Rams that had a little bit of magic. That first game with the Rams last year will be a game that I always remember. That comeback win with him not even knowing the playbook, and I mean, and then him headbutting teammates with helmets on, and he didn't have his helmet on. Right after that, like that'll live in my brain forever, rent free. And I think they're going to try to bring some of that magic over right away, and hopefully that works out because now they have additional running back help as well as they have now brought over Chase Edmonds as well. Do you think that so at the end of the day, I think that it's Rachaad White's job. Do you think that Chase adds any value behind Rachaad White or takes any value away from Rachaad White, or what do you think regarding that?
I think Chase Edmonds is just a guy, in my opinion. And it shows in the contract that he got. It was a little over $1 million, I think. So I think it's Rachaad White, and I think maybe even Vaughn finally gets used for the first time since he's been drafted. But I think Edmonds is a quality third back to have on the roster because he can do a little bit of everything. He's just not spectacular. So I think he's just an extra body in that roster.
Sadly, Vaughn is entering his fourth season, which is his walk year. So just in time for his walk year, they're going to start getting him his first plethora of carries. And that will be pretty interesting if he does pop off and show that he could actually be an NFL running back. But with Edmonds, he did sign a 3-year deal with Miami last year and then got traded to Denver and then cut. So just shows again, like a 3-year deal really isn't a 3-year deal in the NFL. And in a weird way, it makes it the best sport ever because teams can constantly improve and change from year to year. So if you're really terrible one year, you can easily move on from that at some point. So that is pretty an interesting fact that we've talked about a few 3-year contracts that have been ripped up after 1 year.
Yep. Well, you just mentioned the Broncos, and the Broncos have signed running back depth in the form of Samaje Perine. How do you feel about that for Javonte's backup, or do you think Samaje might be the third running back on that roster? How do you think that's going to shake out?
So as of right now, I think Samaje is the only other running back other than Javonte on that team, unless I am missing a running back. But basically what that means is Javonte going to be fully healthy to enter training camp, or is it going to be Samaji's job to begin the year, which he's proven in Mixon's absence that he can be very effective in that role. I know several fantasy players that had traded for or traded away Samaje Perine last year, as we got closer to the trade deadline when Mixon was out. So I do know that he does have fantasy value. It'll be interesting to see what kind of chemistry that he can build with Russell Wilson. And they have a lot of mouths to feed in the pass catching game, so that will also be another interesting aspect. But I do see him being a nice handcuff coming up, especially with an injured Javonte. And it was a pretty bad ACL injury. One of the ones that could take a little bit longer to come back from. So Pirine could have some good fantasy value, some sneaky fantasy value this year.
I'm trying to see if they still have Latavius Murray on their roster at this point.
Isn't he in a retirement home yet?
He's one of those running backs that keep coming back year after year.
Yeah, so Murray is a year-to-year guy right now just because of his age. So I'm not saying they won't bring him back, but he's 33, so they won't bring him back likely until it gets closer to camp.
Yeah, I know that Sean Payton really loves to run the ball. That's his current mentality. So they'll probably bring in more running backs, especially since Javonte Williams is a catastrophic knee injury. I think it's going to take him a little bit more time to come back. So I don't think they're done with that position yet.
Yeah, he's a stay away from me for me when it comes to fantasy drafts this year.
Yeah. Also, a stay away from me player is Jacoby Brissett, signed with Washington. Do you think that he's going to end up being the starter, or do you think he is just a clipboard holder there?
So Rivera has not been very forthcoming, very supportive of Howell. Like, he's taken every opportunity to basically say Howell's not the starter right now. And Brissett, now that he's in, they're hoping that Brissett is they're going to push each other and they're going to pick the best player to start now. Which is kind of crazy because we know that Jacoby has a ceiling, and it's not a very high ceiling for him. He can keep a team afloat for a little while, but he's not a guy that's going to get you up and over that hump. Sam Howell might be another Baker Mayfield. Like, he's kind of a shorter guy. I just don't know. I don't know if they have a really good quarterback situation going into this year. Now, do I think if Jacoby did start, do I think that he could keep Terry McLaurin fantasy relevant? Yes, I do think he could keep one player fantasy relevant, and then hand off the ball a ton to Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. But it'll be very interesting to see which direction that they go, and it'll be a really cool battle to watch because I actually think it's a real battle. I don't think it's I don't think that it's just lip service.
Yeah, I'm on the Sam Howell side. Between those two, I think Sam Howell shows a lot more promise. There are some people who came out of the woodwork after the fact and said, oh, yeah, I always thought Sam Howell was the best quarterback in last year's draft. So I think he shows some promise. I don't know if they're done with the quarterback room. They're another team that could try to get a quarterback in this draft or potentially go after Lamar Jackson. We're going to keep saying his name until some news actually pops out. But I know their owner has some money issues right now, so maybe that's not feasible. It's just, I think, a really good destination for him. But another quarterback that had a really good destination is one of your low-key favorite quarterbacks. Gardner Minshew signed with the Colts today. How do you feel about that move for Gardner?
I am
and for the Colts.
so excited for Gardner because he's going to have a fair shot to start. He's going to have a fair shot to get this to play, and he's going to have a fair shot to potentially keep that starting job. And obviously, this all depends on how the Colts go in the draft. If they do draft a quarterback high, then obviously that ropes off what Gardner Minshew can and can't do going forward. But as it stands right now, he's their week one starter, and he's a gunslinger. So that instantly raises up Michael Pittman's stock. Probably instantly raises up Alec Pierce's stock. Um, they're still like one wide receiver short of a Happy Meal, but they'll get there at some point. Maybe they take a receiver in this draft, but it again not very inspired by the receivers in this draft. But they need to do something to kind of reignite and fuel the fan base. I don't know. I don't know if you remember towards the end of the season, Jim Irsay had written a letter saying that he apologized for how poor the franchise has come off and how he takes it just as hard as everyone else does. So I do believe that they're going to want to put a better product out there on the field this year, which would go against your tanking assessment, because I do think when they have a bad product like this, it really does hurt revenue, like as far as jerseys, ticket sales, everything like that. So like they can't really go down this route one more season because I feel like they're losing a lot of fans left and right at this point. Like when they hired Jeff Saturday and they watched Matt Ryan get benched not once but twice last season, I feel like it's very hard for them to kind of justify not trying to win as many games as possible this year. And I do think Gardner Minshew is a huge step in that direction, because I do think that he brings passion and excitement that they haven't had in a while at quarterback, and he could be a guy that could be around the Colts for a little while. Like I don't know if I know he signed a 1-year deal, but I don't know if it stops at 1 year if as long as it goes well. What do you think?
I actually like Gardner Minshew. I don't think he has the potential to be a long-term starter, like multiple years. I think he's kind of a journeyman starter, in my opinion. Um, I think the Colts had every opportunity to trade up to the number one spot. I'm 100% certain that the Bears said, hey, the Panthers gave us an offer. You guys need to match it. And that didn't happen. They're standing at 4. The first 2 picks are going to be quarterbacks. I don't know how many quarterbacks they actually like themselves. I don't know if a team's going to trade in front of them at the 3rd. Do they like a 4th quarterback there? Are they going to reach for the 4th one that's available, or are they going to trade down? I think they're tanking this year. I think they're not going to get the quarterback that they want this year. I think their most successful years, when the franchise was happiest, was when they had Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck at quarterback, and they look at this draft, there's not one of those guys in this draft, but there is Caleb Williams next year. So they've already traded their best corner. They're letting Matt Ryan go. They're releasing a whole bunch of guys. They're probably, in my opinion, going to trade down and pick up more picks. But that's just a guess. That's just a feeling. I don't think that they signed Gardner Minshew to win, although I do personally like Gardner Minshew like you like Gardner Minshew. So I am not inspired with the Colts. I don't think that they've really made any free agency moves to this point, which is another indication that they're probably going to tank. So that's just my take on it. And I know you can tell me I'm completely wrong and teams don't like to tank, but we learned from the Chicago Bears, if you want to tank, you just trade all your good players and you just won't win.
Was that the team that you thought was tanking last year, or did you think another team was tanking that ended up making the playoffs last year?
So I like you're pointing out, I thought Seattle was tanking last year, but I did not know that it was Russell Wilson that was the problem and not Pete Carroll. So
I know stranger things have happened. Shane Steichen could come in here and have like a much better game plan than Jeff Saturday and the staff and Frank Reich had last year. But we will see. Like whenever we think a team is tanking, that usually means they're going to do pretty well the next year, which is totally like a weird thing. But is there anything worse? Because you brought up Chicago going to Indy saying, hey, Carolina's offering us this. Is there anything worse in a fantasy league than someone saying, hey, I'm getting this offer. Can anyone beat it or match it or
it's certainly annoying for the person who has the agreement with them. Like, why are you shopping this around? We have an agreement. Just execute it.
especially when it happens in group chat?
Oh yeah.
So that led me to the next thought. Do you think the GMs of the NFL have one group chat where there's like 32 people in the group chat and they're sitting there like
that would be hilarious. I wish that was the case. That would be amazing.
X is available.
I'm thinking about shopping Rogers. Anybody interested?
Yep. So speaking of the Seattle Seahawks, I believe this is one of our last transactions of the week. Big transaction week that won't be like this normally, but Drew Lock re-signed in Seattle on a 1-year deal. Kind of made sense for him to go back, be under the system one more year, back up Geno. I think it made sense for all parties for him to go back there. What say you? Like, I know this is not going to be a fantasy relevant person.
Yeah, it's not a fantasy relevant situation, but it does kind of seem to me that they're still evaluating him. He's still young. He could potentially be the person that takes over after Geno if he starts to look good in practice or he starts to mesh well with the coaching staff. So it's encouraging for his career development that they still want him around. But again, it's a 1-year deal, so it doesn't mean anything yet, and it doesn't preclude them, prevent them from going after a quarterback in the draft at some point this year or next year.
Yeah, I think this is a lot like the Sam Darnold to the 49ers deal. Kind of gets a look at a younger quarterback because I think Locke right now is 26. I think Darnold's 25. I don't know if Lance and I don't know if Purdy are it. Like, obviously, there's a reason Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant last year. So it does seem like Sam Fran could be in the market for a quarterback as well. It does seem like Geno might be like a couple-year bridge starter. They might draft someone. They might hope it's Locke. Who knows? But those are two situations to keep an eye on the younger quarterbacks, and maybe they can develop under the coaching tree that they're going to be under.
Yeah. All right. So last item of the day, OBJ held a practice session and showcase in Arizona for several teams and appeared to have a good showing. He seems to be asking for contracts starting around 14 to 20 million per year. How do you feel about OBJ? Do you think he still has something to contribute? Is he still a star wide receiver? Where do you see him going? How much is he going for?
So I see OBJ contributing. I see him contributing quite a bit. I do think it was really smart of him to have a showing, to show that he could do it still. I do think it's really smart to do it right now when there's not very much on the wide receiver market. So let's say someone goes and trades for Mike Evans or goes and trades for DeAndre Hopkins. You're giving up capital to go grab them when you can go sign OBJ for a similar contract and not have to give up the picks to get him. So I think everything that OBJ has done so far has been very smart and very calculated. And I do think he'll get close to that $14-15 million a year contract just because of need and the star power that he brings. Immediately when you bring him in, you're going to be selling jerseys with Beckham Jr. on the back. And that's a huge revenue driver. So I think he does make his money back pretty quickly, like for that team. And the excitement that team would get with OBJ. Now it's fitting him under the cap. That might be the harder part. And there's teams like the Bills that could use a wide receiver that would be really hard for them to fit him under the cap without some maneuvering. But where do you see him fitting best other than like Buffalo?
Well, the one team owner who really likes to sell jerseys more than win per se, and really likes the big ticket, big name players, and that's Jerry Jones. So the Cowboys seem to me like the most likely landing place, especially it's in the NFC East, so he can get some revenge against the Giants if that's what he wants. So I don't know if there's any other team that's that seriously interested in him. I think the Cowboys are pretty much it, in my opinion. But do you think that's a good spot, or do you foresee a different team being a better spot?
So they for sure have a hole because signing him there would bump Gallup to the third, which Gallup's a much better third wide receiver. And they don't really have a fourth right now, and they don't have a tight end. Like, it makes a lot of sense for him to go to Dallas and play indoors and be a star, I guess, and play tax-free.
We know players like that tax-free money.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that does it for our second episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening to this episode or downloading it. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the show. Anything helps.
Yeah, you can find the show on Twitter, clips on TikTok, YouTube, and the handle is at N2EFantasy. Please check it out and give us a follow on each. And remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Never too early.
Bye, everybody.